We've covered a lot of ground today across a wide variety of subjects. And now we've asked our last speaker to touch on some key highlights from today's sessions, as well as provide some closing remarks. And for that, we've asked Diane Brady, who's Bloomberg Businessweek senior editor, to join us to do so. As a bit of a backdrop, Diane is the definition of a multi-platform player, along with blogging, tweeting, writing, and regular broadcast spots. She does a back-page column in the magazine and on-stage interviews with newsmakers worldwide. From debating big data at this year's DLD conference to probing perspectives on game changers for the advertising to women of New York, Diane has a passion for understanding where all things end up. And with that, I'd like to ask Diane to join us on stage. Thank you.
They've put up a little stand for me here, so we can crowdsource whether this is better. I don't think so. No. You know, I was thinking when Linda went down the 8888, I'm going to remember that, but it reminded me of Susie Welch with the 10-10-10. Has anybody read that book where it was, how are you going to feel about this in 10 minutes? How are you going to feel about it in 10 months? And how will you feel about it in 10 years? And we had a very interesting debate around somebody trading collateralized, debt obligations. And basically, I get my bonus, the bank fails, but I don't care. And in 10 years, I'm living in Greenwich. I'm feeling good. So that was his 10-10-10. I want to I'm not going to get, too heavily immersed into sort of wither the media, because I am, in fact, probably old media standing up here. But I will talk a little bit about the concept of growth. And I think it's interesting to start. I was talking with Tom during the break a little bit about some of the themes of the other BMA conferences that are taking place. I think in Beijing, it is focused on working with China, even though they are, in fact, in China. In Europe right now, it's EMEA, and most of that is Middle East and Africa. And then who knows, if they have something in Brazil, it'll be a completely different concept. And I think it's a fascinating topic for me because I've lived in Africa when I was around 20. And I remember people used to want dollars, and they used to say, turn left at the Danish diamond. I think it was the Danish diamond. And basically what that was an obelisk. They'd given $20 million to the government for a 10th anniversary. But in essence, what had happened was about 10,000 of that went to this obelisk. Nobody knew where the rest of the money had gone. So that was their joke about the government. When I lived in Hong Kong, people were in very similar conditions, but the difference was that in Africa at that point, they felt 10 years from now life was going to get worse. In Asia, there was no question when I went there in 94, 95, everyone knew 10 years from now life was going to get better. The receptionists were flipping Deutschmark for yen. The doorman of my building was basically investing in stocks, and it was a mindset. And I'm curious right now about the mindset in the U.S., because I think it's fascinating. I'll give you another anecdote, and it does pertain today, which is I had a backup daycare. You don't need to know my personal problems, but I had backup daycare about 5 days ago. The woman who came, she'd worked at Applebee's, very nice. My son put on the video, The Real Mitt Romney. Have you seen this? Highly recommended, to an Eminem tune. She had not heard of Mitt Romney. She thought his name was Rit. And I thought that was a remarkable accomplishment for a young woman living in New York who had a smartphone, who, she was not in the school system, so she wasn't sort of immersed in presidential politics, but she didn't know that Mitt Romney was the candidate, for the Republican Party. When I said Republican, she goes, oh, them. And it reminded me of when I became an American this year, you're welcome, that one of the things the federal employee said, and most people register Democrat. And I said, A, you can't say that, and B, it's like, oh, okay, it's true. But it was, to me, about curation. And one of the things that fascinates me, whether we're talking about big data, whether we're talking about our ability to sort of source our own information, the quality of information you have is only as good as the friends that you have recommending your information. It's only as good as the voices that you have in the room. And I think one of the perils of self-curation is you can curate yourself down to a very narrow subset of information. I have not listed my husband on Facebook that's a whole other conversation we can continue later. He does not want to be on Facebook. So I'm constantly inundated with dating agency ads. I'm married. I have 3 children. I'm not looking to date. But because they've used information to sort of figure out who I am, the danger is they've perhaps limited their knowledge of who I am. And I think that we end up perhaps limiting our sense of delight, our sense of how new things actually happen. And in fact, when I look at leaders, when I look at what GE's doing, when I look at IBM, when I look at a lot of the players who are here today, what's really made them innovative is that they've stepped outside the box. I'm going to get water. Do you mind? I'm suddenly feeling very, very dry. Oh, thank you. I think that the CTO of Amazon said to me once that you can get a lot of information about somebody, but they have to be very careful about when they start to recommend. Because at a certain point, thank you, they would be recommending Kindles and Harry Potter to everybody because that's what sells on Amazon. When in fact, what they need to do is get enough data to strike a balance between knowing somebody well enough to know what they'd like, but also leaving open the serendipity factor. And where does that get to? I think it gets to the idea of the first thing I'm going to say about this panel today is to look at the people who are talking to us. And I think that what's remarkable is the diversity. And that's, to me, it's not just the creatives. I like the creatives. I'm like, oh my God, what am I? I'm not a creative. I'm creative. Everybody's creative. And I think part of it is that when I looked at Eduardo, for example, with his background with Barcelona and here, and then Ray, who I loved, I thought he was great. He's got Japan, Europe, US, Roberto, entrepreneur in Brazil. So you've got the geographic diversity. You had the industry diversity with Tim Race, Tim Sandra as well. Gary Kopke, who I thought was, again, I just really enjoyed. And gender diversity. One of the things that Jeff Immelt said when he first came to the job, and I've not checked out his Twitter feed, note to self, check that out. He talked about a New York Times piece where they showed the senior executive management of GE. And it was, I don't know if you recall this, it was, I think, like 29 white guys and Lloyd Trotter, African American. He says, we were haunted by that picture. And one of his priorities was diversity. Why? Because he understood the value of bringing those different voices into the room. He understood the value of where creativity happens, which is people basically looking at the intersection of culture, the intersection of technology, and the fact that people want to be delighted that that's where the new things happen. That's where the technology, which I see as a tool. I'm multi-platform because I see Twitter as a tool, Facebook as a tool, print as a tool. My stories, if they're good, will live many different places. Brands, I think, have a great place in this mix. I think there are limits to how much brands can, in fact, create their own content. As long as they have an authentic voice, as long as they embrace the bad and the good, they can have a conversation, but it's difficult to do, frankly. A Walmart, for example, it's world class when it comes to things like carbon disclosure and green. What they're doing with their supply chain in China is awesome. Whether that's extended to other parts of their brand, I think is still a conversation worth having that maybe they haven't done yet. So it's a question to me of where you focus your energies. But I'm going to say one other thing, and I think what I'd like to do is continue the conversation outside as well. But I think we've heard a lot of great information today, basically, about where the world is going. And the message that I have is in terms of, we talked about community. That's what I see Bloomberg as being. We talked about data. That's what I see Bloomberg as being as well. And we talked about growth. And that's certainly what's exciting to me as a journalist, is the idea of reaching more people. I don't know how many of you have heard of Psy. Raise your hands. Okay, so this guy has had, I think he's now at 290 million hits. He is the most liked video of all time on YouTube. I discovered him from my 7-year-old son. And this is so it's not a story about Psy. This is the guy who's doing Wampum Gangnam. Is that it? Gangnam. He's doing the Gangnam dance. And What was interesting to me was how the media treated him when he came here, which was Ellen DeGeneres, Britney Spears had tweeted, "I gotta learn this dance. It's this horse riding dance." So he comes on to the Ellen show, and they didn't even really introduce him. Britney just said, "Okay, show me the dance." Ellen's like, "I love this guy. Let's start dancing." You know, he could have been Rebecca Black. He could have been Charlie Bit My Finger. We had no idea. Who is this guy? Well, it turns out, in fact, he is a well-established pop star in Korea. He is somebody he's now working on his 7th album. He's a songwriter for many stars. Gangnam's a section of Seoul that is where all the new money lives. I discovered that through Ryan Seacrest. Great interview that Ryan Seacrest did. Why does that matter? Because by focusing just on the headlines, he just went home from a 3-week tour in the U.S. I think most Americans didn't realize what great insight that could have given them into Korea. And Korea, in many ways, South Korea has displaced or is displacing Hong Kong as the culture engine for East Asia right now. Fascinating stuff. We wouldn't know it by having a one-dimensional view of this guy. It's only when we dug a little deeper. In fact, I didn't realize his father is a tycoon whose stock price has doubled as a result of this hit. I thought, oh, that's good for it. So much fascinating. And I think, to me, the message I would leave you with, I will go with the pragmatic. I do agree with the paralysis of choice. There's no question. There's too much information for us. I think the danger is when we start to think about what kind of information we give people and what they want. I think we do limit when we think about what matters. I think when we talk as well about kind of the idea of who's curating, I don't think of myself as a curator. I think of myself as somebody who asks questions, and hopefully, if we're doing our jobs, we're making people smarter 12 months from now. We're helping to tell them what they need to know. They're telling me what we need to know. We're creating, in a way, communities that are like a dinner party, where people get enough that they're delighted, that they say, oh, I didn't know that. They're getting insight into the rest of the world. And they're challenging their own perceptions as well of where the world's going. Another example I'll give you with Bloomberg. I am the biggest techno-peasant when it comes to using the Bloomberg. I'm not a finance professional. But there are certain functions on there that I've always found cool. One of them is this supply chain function where you could look up, I'll take Apple Computer. The minute that a disaster hits, you could look it up and figure out where in the supply chain was being affected. It was the coolest tool. When Fukushima hit, you could tell which car company had sourced a fan belt near Fukushima. I know I'm a terrible salesperson for the Bloomberg terminal. That is a cool function. That's a function that the C-suite's quite interested in. That's the kind of information that has value to certain people at certain times. They don't want it all the time. People have their dashboards. Everybody has their dashboard. It could be a dashboard that's in their hand. It could be a dashboard on their computer. I think the biggest challenge that we have as journalists, as marketers, is to keep our dashboard broad enough. You know, one of the words that has come up here today is Renaissance. And, you know, we think about the Renaissance, I think about, well, okay, flat paintings to really interesting paintings, Medici's, you know, the one-percenters of Italy at the time. What it really was, it was about new voices. And I think that it was bringing a lot of more voices into the conversation. And as a result, it wasn't just the church, it wasn't just the king, it was the merchants, it was, you know, the people from Asia, it was going out and exploring and discovering the world is in fact round. That's what led to science and creativity and advancement. It was having those voices. And if I have to think about one of the opportunities that we have right now, especially in the U.S., it's to be really bringing in those voices and to really understand the voices that are not at the table. One of the things that I think is fascinating, we talk a lot about investing in women and girls. The UK has now surpassed the US in terms of women on boards. And I'm interested in that because, in fact, the average age of board members is going up in this country. I've talked to board members who've been independent board members since 1971. from the time when a company was a small $15 million family-owned company to when it's an $8.5 billion giant. And I wonder about the voices in that room. I wonder about their ability to really reach customers. There's such a strong business case. I see it again and again. We vaguely recognize it, but I don't think that we fully appreciate it sometimes, and it's one of the things that has made this country so interesting to me. And I will end off with this before sort of thanking everybody, which is, I used to do a lot of debating, and I remember vividly going to Glasgow, where I grew up. I heard a Glasgow accent here. And there was an American in the crowd, and he said he was just looking at the taps obsessively, and he said, "Have you guys ever thought of taking the hot tap and the cold tap, putting them together in the same tap? What do you think?" And then the Scottish were like, I can do the accent, "Those Americans, they're always trying to change things." And I thought, that's right. That's what made this place so great. You'd go to the universities, and there would be people from all over the world. And that, to me, is what social media is doing. It can distract you, frankly. It can really derail you into thinking that everything is journalism, that blogging about Iraq is as good as being in Iraq. It's not. I think having, I don't know what we have now, 2,300 reporters, certainly has made a difference to me in my reporting, to actually send people out to talk and to listen. And I think also having these new tools has made us more honest, it's made us more transparent, and hopefully it's making us all smarter about where the opportunities are. So that is hopefully, I think, touching on where I see the transformations taking place, because I think that we are at a time of great excitement. Mobile technology, go to South Korea, in fact, go to Africa, and look at what they're doing in Africa with mobile banking. They're way ahead of us. We've seen great spurts of entrepreneurialism in Africa. It is a different place. And I think that our job as journalists is to really sort of both chronicle that, to listen, and hopefully to make everybody smarter. So I'm going to thank BMA and Carl Anderson and the fabulous speakers. And I'm also going to thank Bloomberg because, you know, as a brand ambassador, I'm probably unpredictable, but they are in fact very focused on growth, and they're very resilient, and that is the theme. If I have to talk about zeitgeist and what people talk about now, it's resilience. And resilience is not about being able to predict the future. It's why do some coral reefs die when there's pollution, and why do other coral reefs survive? Why do some people bounce back from trauma and other people make it? It's because they've put in place the infrastructure where they can ride out the lack of predictability. I don't try to predict the future. Smart companies don't. They try to have in place the right teams, the right tools, the right thinking, so that they can master the change and they can be the ones disrupting their own business models. So I hope that that's certainly the takeaway I got from today. And I hope we'll continue the conversation because life is getting less predictable, and to me that's exciting. So thank you.